What's up, everybody? Welcome to Recap with Radical. My name is Adam, aka CS Radical. Thank you so much for joining us on this edition, as we are going to be going over stories that we didn't cover on episode 171 of the Pixel Play podcast, that being what released on October the 9th of 2024. We only have 3 stories this week for you, not the usual 4, but hey, the third one's a real doozy, so we've got plenty of time with that. We're going to be talking about Ghost of Yotei, how it's going to have a less repetitive open world. We're going to be talking about the Until Dawn remake. Hey, 2 straight weeks where there's a remake that no one understands why it's here, and this one's out, and it is apparently garbage. We'll talk about that. And then we are going to have a long conversation about how there is some decent research that was done that kind of proves what most of us gamers already know, but that single-player games seem to be much more preferred than everything else. But hey, we will get to that in just a moment. But don't forget, while you're here, if you're watching on YouTube, like and subscribe. If you're listening on any audio platform, maybe you are watching on an audio platform like, say, a Spotify where the video version is available, if you can give us any sort of like or rating, please do so. And don't forget to always share with all your friends who would be interested in our type of content. So with that being said, let's move right on to our first story of the day. So obviously we were recently announced of the sequel to Ghost of Tsushima, Ghost of Yotei, and our new character of Atsu, which will be a female, which, well, that's its own other story for another day, maybe. But the developer Sucker Punch shared us a little few tidbits about this sequel in an interview they published on the New York Times. So creative director Jason Connell did mention that one of the changes compared to Ghost of Tsushima that they wanted to take care of was a less repetitive open world, which honestly makes a lot of sense to me. I ended up quitting the game about halfway because it just was way too repetitive and I got bored of it. So his comment was, one challenge that comes with making an open world game is the repetitive nature of doing the same thing over again. We wanted to balance against that and find unique experiences. So I've seen a lot of different posts about this. The most encouraging thing at least seems to be that they're going to try to have less repetitive tasks. I still haven't seen what I really want to hear, and it's that the open world is going to be not nearly as big. Now, I know more often than not, usually they get bigger, which is not what I want to happen, because as playing a lot of these games, they don't need to be that large because there's nothing to do in most of them. And especially in a game like Ghost of Yotei in this case, where you're not going to have like really fast travel, you're going to have at most horseback. It doesn't really work very well for these maps. I mean, Horizon Until Dawn, or I guess Horizon Forbidden West as well. But like, I played all of Assassin's Creed Odyssey, and walking ain't that fun. Horseback ain't that fun. Red Dead really pushed it, but Red Dead also just had events that could come out of nowhere that you have no idea are coming, and it's not like a symbol on the map. So there's always that intrigue of anything could happen at any moment while you're out there. Whereas in most of these open world games, you have the map and it tells you something here, something here, something here, something here, and maybe something there. That's it. You don't really get any other surprises. And when the travel is not that fast, you don't have cars, you don't have trains, you don't have any sort of flying apparatuses, it really makes the world much more lengthy to travel. It makes the world feel even deader. Because like in a GTA game, or a Saints Row game, or a Mafia game, all of those, that we have lots of vehicle travel, you don't necessarily get the sense that the world is empty because you're speeding through it so quickly that it doesn't really have that sort of vibe. Whereas on horseback or walking, like a forest feels like forever. Whereas in a cityscape where there's a lot of different things to see, in a car that can help a little bit. But in a game like Ghost of Tsushima, that was a big problem for me, is that it's just trees and open land and a town very sporadically. That's it. Really isn't that much else going on. So every area doesn't really feel too much different. And it causes, it caused me at least to not have an interest in seeing what's beyond it. And when I got to what I would presume to be the midway point where a whole new section of the map opened up, I went, no, I'm not doing this again. And Forbidden West, I recently went through when that came out, and similar things. Like, I gave up on all the open world stuff. Eventually, I went, no, I'm done. I'm doing the story because I know I'm not far off, and that's it. And that's the point where it's getting to. Now, I'm sure people would say, well, just play the story then. But then I'm basically buying a game to only play 25% of the game. I don't feel like that's value then, if that's the case. And that's kind of the problem with a lot of these. Whereas Yakuza games, because I will sing the praises of Yakuza all the time, those games, when you play in the open world, almost every single thing you can do there is unique. Sure, they carry some stuff over in terms of their mini games and stuff, but the side quests, they're all something unique. They're never the same. So there's always a different vibe to everything you're doing, and it always feels like you're going to encounter something else. And again, those maps aren't so massive. They're like perfectly sized, honestly. They actually make sense for what they're trying to do there. And a lot of the things around you in that area have some sort of purpose. It's very rare to go very far on a street where there's nothing to interact with. It's very rare. So that always helps with that. Whereas in a game like Ghost of Tsushima, there's a lot of nothingness out there, and it really makes it not that interesting to play after a while. So hopefully with this game, that they're able to find a better balance to it. Like I said, I plan on giving this a second shot because, I definitely have an interest based on the trailer so far and seeing stories like this with, the open world elements being a lot less repetitive. It gets my attention. It makes me a little more hopeful that maybe this one will click a lot better, because it's not like I didn't hate the gameplay. I enjoyed what I did play of it. It just, the story wasn't clicking, and the open world gameplay was just so repetitive to the point that I felt like I was literally wasting time with it. And I didn't want to continue with it anymore. So hopefully these changes and more, I hope they also don't make a map nearly as massive, that it's going to make this game a lot more enjoyable. Now, sure, it might cut a few hours, but that means that you're going to be cutting less dead time in these hours, which is more important to me than the actual finishing time itself. But hey, that's my thoughts there. So you tell me in the comments below what you think on that. How do you think about open world elements? Do you think they are getting too repetitive in games? Do you think that, maybe the maps needs to be bigger? Maybe it needs to be smaller? Like, what do you think about all of these kind of things? Let us know in the comments below. So last week we talked about the Horizon Zero Dawn remake and why we didn't understand why that was needed. And then we went on to this one with the Until Dawn remake, which we also went, I don't think anyone asked for that. And now it's getting a lot of criticism because in the eyes of a lot of people who have played both now, it is looking way worse than the original. So this story comes from thegamer.com, and over the past few days, fans and content creators have been getting their hands on the title a little bit early. There has been a lot of criticism swirling on social media about Until Dawn's PS5 version looking way worse than the original. Now, a lot of things I have seen, I was watching Digital Foundry's video before I started recording this. There's definitely some changes they made in terms of the gameplay that have been very nice additions, but the core of it is that the frame rate's running worse. It looks really odd, like it's way brighter now, so it doesn't have nearly as dark a presence to it. So there's a lot of like weird design choices with it, but then like the biggest thing really is it's buggy as hell and it's crashing a lot too, which you don't really want from a game that's supposed to be a better version of the thing it's going after. And it brings again into question, like, it almost feels like, whenever a writer's strike happens and Hollywood just suddenly goes right back to its tried and true method, which is just sequels, and more sequels. We can't make anything new. It feels like what's happening a lot now, and Sony has been really bad for this lately. I mean, obviously, we just talked about Horizon's remaster last week, is they're not coming up with new ideas. Recently on the podcast a few episodes ago, we talked about how Sony has a lot of IP that they're just sitting on. And they pretend like that doesn't exist and that there isn't enough IP in their library to really have like a full library of content, which is bullshit. And now we're seeing stuff like this where they just keep popping up remasters and remakes of games that no one's asking for. Like, it's not like Horizon Zero Dawn or Until Dawn are a bad game and couldn't use like a fix. It's those games are perfectly serviceable and they're not that old. So the need to remake them doesn't really apply. Like this, we're not talking about remaking Sly Cooper 1. We're not talking about remaking Jak and Daxter. We're talking about remaking a game that isn't even a decade old, I think. Like, let me just quickly Google Until Dawn, when its release date was. 2015. Yeah, it's not even 10 years old yet. So the honest question is what are they doing? Are they just like treading water because they have no ideas? Like, what's happening here? Do you not trust your ability to make new games? Like, what is the reason here? Apart from, I guess, just easy cash grabs that take far less work and they can probably just AI upscale a lot of stuff, which, you know what? I think I might have just answered my own question there. But it doesn't make a lot of sense from a business perspective, even from that logic, right? Like, we're talking about games that have not really gotten to a point where like people are pining for another one of it. We're not talking like, like there was no outreach for Until Dawn. There was no reach for Horizon Zero Dawn in the same way that, say, Bloodborne has, right? And I don't even think like Bloodborne fans are necessarily saying we want a remake. I think they just want another Bloodborne. So we're talking sequels. We're not even talking remasters and remakes here. It makes sense for what Capcom's doing with the old Resident Evil games. Like, that was a great choice. And look at what it's done. It's made so many of these classics, in some cases even better, and also bringing it to a bunch of people that have never played it before. There are people that can easily access Until Dawn right now, the original. You don't need a remake for this reason. So really, let's think off the top of our heads. Is it to get to a new set of fans? No, because they can already do that with the original, and the original is still very well praised for its time. So that's not it. Is it a case of the original was just, a bit of a mess and they were looking to improve it? Doesn't really apply either. It was very well designed for its time. Like, in terms of graphics, was pretty good for that era in 2015. And then the last thought is, well, okay, but is there, does it make business sense to put out this game, in the field of what it's going for? And the answer is definitely no, because in terms of remakes, even for horror games alone, there are several licenses that are doing a much better job of it and are already taking over that. Resident Evil, Dead Space, and Silent Hill 2 Remake. So, like, there's no logical reason to put this game out unless you're literally just sitting there as a CEO in an office who has no fucking idea how video game development actually works and goes, we're looking for something to make us a quick buck here. How about we just get a team, like, remake this game that, was marginally popular like 10 years ago? And somebody probably said, well, we could just make a new game. No. That's going to be too much money. We just want to just put it on the sheet. And here we are, and doesn't seem like a lot of people are all that interested in it. And now that we also know that it wasn't really made too well, that's going to take a hit on the sales even further. So I really don't know what the decision making was here. You guys in the comments below, you let me know what you think there. What do you think the reasons for was? Do you think it was just them trying to go for a quick cash grab? Do you think there was any other sort of logic to it? And did you even have any interest in this game? Is this something you ever intended to play? Let us know there. But yeah, let me never know whatever you feel like there in the comments on this story. So usually we have 4 stories every episode, but this one I thought was big enough that I was going to take a lot more time than I was going to need for a 3rd story or a 4th story here. So you know what? Here we are. Most gamers prefer single-player games. That is research that has come out from mediaresearch.com, and that is spelled MIDIA, not MEDIA. And they gave like, you have to, do a little bit more to get the full report, so I'm going off of mostly what their synopsis was talking about. It gives us quite a good bit of information, though, and at least gives us some nice data in terms of, how age brackets prefer single-player games over others. And this is a good chunk of the data that they kind of profess without you having to go too deep into the report. So a couple of the major things that they talked about were a few points that they said have really changed how the industry has kind of designed things. And the first one that they came with was the idea that it feels like a lot of single-player studios are suddenly being pushed into making live service games. Now, this makes a lot of sense already because we know even from Sony alone, the Last of Us live service game, or the Last of Us Factions, I think was supposed to be called, that was canceled. So obviously there's a hit right away. Concord, even for, a company that was going to make something new. So it doesn't really apply here, but we know that how well that's gone. But like Horizon's supposed to be getting a live service online game as well. And we have no idea how it's going with that. They gave other examples such as Crystal Dynamics' Marvel's Avengers. That game was... I'm glad I played the demo because that would have been money not very well spent. EA's Anthem, or I guess BioWare's Anthem, but let's be real, it was EA's decision-making at this point. And that game, I knew from the very get-go was not going to be very good. Platinum Games with Babylon's Fall, that was a bad one. And then obviously Microsoft's Redfall with Arcane Studios. And those are all egregious examples. And those were all studios that were doing a very good job with single player games. Crystal Dynamics, Tomb Raider, BioWare, Mass Effect, Dragon Age, Platinum Games, Bayonetta, I think, is one of the major ones that come off to mind. What was the one that they had canceled? Let me see. I'm forgetting what it was. Platinum Games canceled Scalebound. That's right. The Xbox one that was supposed to be for them. So instead of a single player game, they ended up doing Babylon's Fall, and that obviously didn't do very well at all. And then Redfall, I mean, obviously Arcane Studio. I think it was a different, because Arcane Austin, I believe, was the one that did it. And I think that was their first project on their own. Let me just double check that here, because I think that was a little bit stranger. Because Arcane Leon is, oh no, they did Prey. I forgot about that. Because I was going to say, Arcane Leon was the one that do most of their other stuff, being like Dishonored, Deathloop, Wolfenstein, that stuff. But yeah, Roundhouse Studios and Arcane Austin were the ones that did Redfall. So really, like, they did Prey and was actually a pretty well-received single-player game. And then all of a sudden, they get into the live service game trend, and it fails massively. Lots of money get lost. Lots of jobs are cut. And we just keep the cycle going. So it really just, I mean, it confirms what we all know as gamers, right? Like, they're chasing the buck that a lot of these, you know, live service games like a Fortnite, Apex Legends, even what Destiny 2, for example, is doing. And assuming that just because they make a game with the same style, that they'll rake in money. And we keep seeing over and over and over again, like, take a look at a game like Foam Stars, which just died immediately. Although that one stayed up, whereas, not Deathloop, Concord completely died in 2 weeks. And it keeps showing that, like, there's only so much room in that space. It's the same way, and I've said it so many times on the podcast before, it's like how it used to be, MMORPG after MMORPG, because they wanted to hit the WoW crowd. You're never going to pull them away for longer than a couple of months. They always go back. You can pull people from a game, but you very rarely will keep them to yours and not the one that they've already put a ton of time into. They will try it, and a lot of streamers will try it because it's views, but they will not stay. They will move on to the next one, which means their audience will move on to the next one, which means so many other players will move on to the next one too, because the player count is going down and less people are there to play with them. Pretty self-explanatory there. They also add that there's a undeniable opportunity cost that a lot of these studios' single-player offerings have respectively generated hundreds of millions in revenue. But how much revenue and positive consumer sentiment was left on the table because these companies were pushed to make live service games? Aggravating things, the market is too delicate for most publishers to take huge risks in an oversaturated space. And that just comments based on what I just said a second ago, where the space itself is already too busy. There's too much going on. And all of these companies now are trying to capitalize on it without realizing that there's a very small piece of the pie left. You're not going to do Fortnite money. You're not going to do Apex money. It's too late. You would have to be Game of the Year quality to take any sort of that group away from what they're already at. And even then, it's not a guarantee. So the idea that these companies are all putting so much money into these live service games that are almost doomed to fail. They might make a decent chunk to start, but then it dies. And a lot of the times, the budget's been so big that they're not recouping everything back because the game isn't lasting long enough to do so. So it doesn't make a lot of sense. It seems like, again, going back to what I said earlier in the Until Dawn story, it's a CEO that doesn't know what the fuck he's doing and just looking at what's trendy right now and saying, oh, that's what we have to do. That's never been the video game industry is not that simple. People just assume that if you copy what the most popular thing is, that it guarantees money. It really doesn't. It never really has either. Like, it's so rare that a game that is loosely, like, low in quality, but based off of something else does really, really well. It's very rare that that happens. You either have to put the best possible effort in, or you're going to fail. And that's what most of these games are doing. They're failing because they're at best 7 out of 10 quality games, and there's already 1, 2, 3, sometimes 10 games that are better than it that have been out for much longer. You're not going to stave these people off for very long. They're going to go right back to their comfort food. And that happens every single time. They also add that while new live service games have floundered, new single player games have continued to smash records and generate hundreds of millions or more. It's not just juggernaut IP like Zelda and Spider-Man, but it's also games like Elden Ring, which sold 25 million, Black Myth Wukong, which sold 20 million. It's just showing that single player games seem like a safer bet. And there's a lot of reasons behind it as well. Like, when you really do think about it, a lot of these live service games, what is the biggest thing they try to capitalize on? FOMO, fear of missing out. They need you to always be there. So the problem is spending money on a game where you cannot leave it is very difficult for a lot of people to do. If you are a parent, it is nigh impossible already from that point on. If you are just a regular adult with a full-time job, that can also be difficult. It makes sense that for a lot of, and I'll even talk about this data now. Like, the one bit of image data that they show was how the age brackets defined how gamers will play single-player games in terms of their preferences. And as soon as you get to 25 and 34 and older, it goes higher and higher and higher into single-player being the preferred thing. So the top from each category is as follows. For 16 to 19, it's 40% online PvP, 30% single-player, 28% couch co-op, and 15% PvE. Moving on to 20 to 24, 43% online PvP, 35% single player, 22% couch co-op, 18% PvE. So it's already starting to shift a little bit. 25 to 34, where it starts to completely flip, 41% for single player, 40% for online PvP, 24% couch co-op, 21% PvE. And that's the highest PvE ever gets. And that's around that sweet spot where you get into like your Destiny 2 sort of era stuff. 35 to 44, 49% single player, 35% online PvP, 21% co-op, 18% PvE. 45 to 54. Now, you're probably going to have a smaller data stream from this, but again, it's just to show that, the older people get and when they have less and less time to devote to stuff, this is going to happen. 65% single player, 30% online PvP, 18% couch co-op, 10% PvE. And finally, for 55 and up, 74% single player, 22% online PvP, 13% couch co-op, and 6% PvE. And on it as a whole average, 53% of all gamers say single player is their preferred way to play. They didn't say for the rest of them, but you have to imagine that online PvP is going to be somewhere, if I'm assuming somewhere around like the 25 to 30% range, and then everything else is like a very small piece between PvE and couch co-op. But single player, by more than half of gamers that they surveyed, and it looks like based on their source here, they did this in the second quarter of 2023, featuring countries the US, UK, Australia, Canada, Germany, France, Sweden, South Korea, and Brazil, and the estimation was around 9,000. So a decent chunk of data, and really, it proves what I've known for a while. It's that younger audiences will crave the online PvP combat because they're into more the reaction-based, fast-paced stuff. And as you get older, you start to have less and less time to devote to these things, and you start to be like, in my case, I stopped dealing with online PvP games by like low 30s because I was tired of getting mad all the time. I was really tired of being salty at everything. I was really tired at getting, mad and yelling at my screen, friggin' like hitting my controller against my desk or something. Like, I felt embarrassed that I was doing that. So I've slowly transitioned away and playing a lot more single player stuff. And if I do play anything online, it's generally PvE, because at least then I can only get mad at the game itself and not, other people. There's no risk of me suddenly, getting into that toxic wasteland where you have, like just insert the old days of Xbox 360 Modern Warfare, like lobbies where it's just slurs and homophobic comments all day long. And just, I don't miss it at all, man. And because now I play single player, I have so many other things I can mix with it. Like, depending on the kind of game, I can throw a podcast on in the background. I can throw chill music in the background. I can stop at any time, most of the time. Sometimes there are games where you can't pause. Take an Elden Ring, for example. But most of the time, if you need to take a break, you can. And if you take a break, whether it's for 2 hours or 2 weeks or 2 months, You can go right back to where you were, and you haven't missed a thing. You may forget some of the stuff you did, but you haven't missed anything. And that is a big part of why people prefer single player games, because that fear of missing out doesn't exist. It is gone. Unless, the fear of missing out is, not getting to play the game within the first month and you get spoiled. Which case, stay off social media, I guess. But apart from that, the numbers don't really lie, in that the vast majority of gamers to this point are preferring single player games. And really, a lot of companies are just going for that teenager to like mid-20s crowd, because we still live in this age where companies seem to believe that gaming is a youth hobby. And it will take them another 20 years to figure this out. Gaming is no longer a kid hobby anymore. When the Super Nintendo was around, it was definitely a kids and family hobby. That's what it was. By the time the PlayStation and PlayStation 2 were out, in those eras, it shifted. And it has not changed since, and it is only growing stronger in that aspect. It became a across-the-board gaming hobby. It was not just for kids. It was for teenagers. It was for young adults. It was now for older adults. You get stories like the Skyrim grandma now. I'm going to be playing games till I die. That will not change. There is no way that's going to change. And companies, by chasing a trend, are chasing a trend that exists for a portion of the gaming audience. The problem with that is too many of their projects are focusing on that one piece of the pie and not focusing on another piece. So many games are no longer going the single player route, which means, according to this data that they've pulled, 53% of gamers are looking at this going, I might play it, but it's not like what I really want to play the most. And it's missed opportunity after missed opportunity. And until these companies, I don't know what data they're pulling from, but I have enough data in front of me without even having to ask people to know that live service games are not as successful as single player games. But you know why? Because Game of the Years never seem to get nominated for those live service games. I'm going to go pull up the Game of the Year nominee lists and see how many live service games have been nominated since the Game Awards started doing this. So let's go all the way down. 2023, 0. 2022, 0. 2021, 0. 2020. I don't know. Do you count Animal Crossings? Let's give it a half point. Let's put a 1 with a question mark. So basically 0. 2019, 0. Smash Ultimate. Well, I guess Smash Ultimate. You know what? We'll give that a 1 because there's always DLC to buy for more characters. You know what? We'll give that a passing grade. There's 1 that we can say for certainty. 2018, 0. 2017, PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, 2. 2016, 0. Oh no, sorry, Overwatch. I was missing that for a second. 3. Okay, so we are already like almost 7 or 8 years in. 3. 2015, 0. 2014, 1. Hearthstone. So for 10 years now, and it's either 5 or 6 nominations. They recently went to 6 since 2018. They used to be 5 before that. So for 10 years, you had, if I just do the math quickly in my head, so you had 5 years, so there's 25, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years of 6, it's 60. So for 55 games, you had 7% being live service. Now you can make a case, well, live service hasn't really been a thing for that long. Okay. So let's just kind of say, like, let's just even use PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds as the benchmark now. So we're at 2017. So we're looking at 5 and then 30 after that. So we do 3 out of 35. That is only jumping it to 8%. It is almost no difference. So at best, if we're being charitable, you have a 10% chance of a Game of the Year nominee. They never have won. If I just go back, I don't think any of those won. Overwatch is the only one that won. So in the entirety of these 10 years of the Game Awards, you have an 8% chance, but if we want to be charitable, a 10% chance at best of even getting a nomination. And really, let's be honest, Overwatch is going to be the last time a live service game ever wins. I would be shocked if it ever happens again. I really don't think it's going to happen again. You're basically never going to win a Game of the Year nomination because all the best games are coming from single player because the content is there, the quality is put in there. There just isn't... You're never going to get that push from nominations like that. You're going to win like maybe potentially a best multiplayer game. But let's be real, as the data shows, that is a small segment of the audience. That's not the massive core of the audience. Now, I'm not saying don't make live service games. I'm not. I understand that there are people that really like those games. But what I would say in response to all this data that we have, and honestly, not meta, what's the word I'm looking for? But basically, like the thing that doesn't actually have logistical data is just what I can see with my own two fucking eyes. You can make a couple here and there, but if you're crowding the market, it's not going to work, and it never will work. Because unless you put a 10 out of 10, you aren't going to eclipse other games that have been out there for years now. And even if you have a 10 out of 10, it's not even necessarily guaranteed, but we don't really have that example because they're never 10 out of 10 games because they're half-assed, they're rushed out the door, and they're designed to be predatory so people don't end up fucking liking them after a couple of months. There's a reason why Helldivers, even at its best, couldn't stick because, not even because of the actual content of the game, but because Sony decided, hey, let's region lock it, and that's going to piss a bunch of people off, and then people left. You can't do it for that long unless you were there when it started. Concord failed because it was too late and it had no ground to start with. Overwatch worked because there was nobody else really doing it. It's too late now. You're not going to be Final Fantasy XIV and become the 1A or 1B of MMORPGs next to WoW. It's not going to happen. You're not going to be 1A to 1B to Fortnite. You're not going to be 1A, 1B to Apex Legends. Stop fucking trying. If you're going to make these kind of games, put a lower budget on them. Actually put a little bit of work into it. Make something that actually, is different, because a lot of them just end up being copy and pasted, basically. I mean, literally, Concord was Overwatch mixed with Guardians of the Galaxy, basically, in a nutshell. So either put some effort into it, or here's an idea, don't. Because time and time again, it fails. And all that happens is you lose money, you cut jobs, because you can't take a cut to your own goddamn salary or your bonus structure because the shareholders sure as shit ain't going to deal with that. Or you straight up close the studio that made it. And the last thing that we want is less content. It may seem like, when the industry is so crowded that maybe backing off on content is the right move. No, it's not. It's just backing off of X content and instead making Y content or Z content or Q content. Whatever you want to do, just do something else, because chasing the trend this late into the game is never a good idea. Single player games never run out because they can always come back to at any time. They can always be purchased 6 years down the road and the content has not changed. It is still the core that was there at the start. You don't have to worry about catching up to anything. You just go, and if you need to take a break, you can. But hey, that is my long-ass rant about how companies are stupid. You guys let us know in the comments below there. What do you think? Do you think that the data is maybe a little misleading? Do you think the data kind of confirms what you already know? How do you feel? Are single-player games your best bet? Is that what you usually gravitate towards? Are you more of an online PvP, a live service gamer? Let us all know your thoughts in the comments below on that one. Well, that's going to do it for this episode of Recap with Radical. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode. Keep in mind, these are always now Fridays, as we are moving these side quests to Mondays from now on. Don't forget, if you're on YouTube, as I said at the top, like and subscribe. If you're watching or listening on any sort of audio platform that either offers audio or video versions of this show,
Obviously, if you can like it, please do. If you can give it a rating, please do. Share it with all your friends. And don't forget about our link tree, linktr.ee/pixelplay podcast, link to our socials, link to our Discord, link to wherever you can get the podcast. So with that being said, we will see you on the next episode of whatever you're watching, whether it's the main podcast, Recap with Radical, or the side quest. Take care, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye for now.